Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining us this afternoon, we have Meera Pandit, Executive Director and Global Market Strategist at Morgan Asset Management, as well as Sasha Cohen, Disruptive Change Analyst at Morgan Stanley Investment Management. And we're here to discuss key themes from Avenue Connection, the largest conference in Brazil for those who invest abroad. It is great to have the both of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. Meera, we'll kick it off with you. It seems to be one of the key themes has been alternatives really have been a demand for investors.
Typically, investors are trying to solve for one of three outcomes. They're looking for alpha, they're looking for diversification, they're looking for income. And increasingly, that has become a bigger challenge in just looking in the public markets, which is why more and more people are looking to alternatives. So I'll give you a couple of examples here. If you think about alpha, it's taking companies longer to go public. Fewer of them are going public. And again, when they are, sometimes they want to be larger or they want to be older. And that means a lot of the big growth in those companies that used to be happening in areas like small and mid cap are actually now happening in much larger companies or in the private markets first. So that is unlocking a lot of different opportunities for investors. If you think about concentration, that's another huge issue within the overall markets when we think about the largest S&P 500 concentration in 50 years. So if we think about it from that lens, a lot of those big opportunities when we think about emerging themes like AI are happening in a small number of very large public companies, or the action is, again, in the private markets or areas like venture. So that is an area where people are finding differentiated opportunities. You think about things like income, harder to find reliably and stably in bonds, and therefore people are turning to areas like real assets, whether it's infrastructure or real estate. And then finally, you think about diversification, the plain old 60-40 portfolio. A lot of times stocks and bonds are moving together more recently. We enjoyed 20 years when they would move in opposite directions, that negative stock bond correlation. That's become a lot less reliable really since the pandemic. And this is an era much like what we experienced from the 60s through the 90s. So if we're headed back to that type of environment, we're going to need to find diversification in other places, another area where areas like real assets or hedge funds can help. So when you put all of that together, a lot of the outcomes we're looking for from portfolios simply are not as plentiful as they once were in the public markets, which is why a lot of people are choosing to go private.
Yeah. And Sasha, tell us about the focus with disruptive change research. What are some of the key topics that the team is working on?
So disruptive change research is one of our pillars of research and really allows us to identify unique companies earlier in their life cycle. And the themes that we're looking at today are autonomous vehicles, nuclear fusion, energy transition, transformation in the defense industry, even longevity, and really trying to identify very compelling management teams and areas that we think will change the investment landscape in the next 5 to 10 years and have these type of second order effects, like you saw with iPhone, unlock the whole app economy and all the things that were able to be built on top of that. And so this type of long-term thinking really is, I think, kind of unique within the investment side and allows us to identify these really big wins and companies that we think will absolutely transform the landscape in the next decade.
So it sounds like both of your research platforms, Sasha, that they're heavily rooted in fundamental analysis and research as you're looking to identify these themes and the companies that have exposure to them.
Absolutely. We integrate this with kind of a bottom-up approach with the rest of our team. And this is a complementary research tool that we use, and we do these really intensive deep dives that allow us to really think about where the world is going. And, you know, for instance, nuclear fusion is a topic that we spent a lot of time on in the last few years, particularly since Lawrence Livermore National Labs achieved net gain for the first time. And if nuclear fusion can be successfully commercialized at a compelling cost and it's economical, it could transform not only the energy landscape, but unlock all these opportunities like desalinating water that would absolutely kind of change how we're able to do a number of things, but just unlock all these really, really compelling opportunities. And so nuclear fusion is one of the areas where we're focused on today.
Yeah. And Meera, you were comparing today's environment to prior periods in the past, and you've noted that tendencies towards economic nationalism. Is it quite deglobalization? And does that increase fragmentation or how companies are thinking about trade partners and what trade is going to look like going forward? I've got to imagine that's part of the calculus as well.
Right. You have two tectonic shifts going on for investors. The first is you think about alternatives, you think about public to private, some of the difficulty in finding different outcomes. That is a huge shift when we think about portfolio construction. But if we zoom out to the broader macro environment we're in, we are seeing some pretty meaningful changes in terms of the way governments operate in this current landscape. So you come into the 2020s after having a decade of low investment, low interest rates, low growth, relatively low inflation as well, into the post-pandemic era where all of a sudden you do have a more inflation-sensitive economy. You do have governments that are gearing towards fiscal policy that is, again, as you point out there, the economic nationalism. How do we think a bit more protectionist in terms of our supply chains, trade? You see a lot of that unfolding geopolitically this year, but also in the last couple of years. And then you pair that with some of this fiscal activism. No longer are we in this era of austerity where governments are not willing to spend outside of really the US for many years. Instead, you have most governments across the world thinking about infrastructure investing, energy investing, broader AI. There's so many different transitions afoot. You think about, again, the broader energy transition that has been in question for a number of years now. And that is certainly driving a lot of different investment themes and the way we construct portfolios, not only the vehicles and the outcomes we're looking for, but as Sasha highlights, some of the very specific investment opportunities that maybe weren't as compelling 5 or 10 years ago, but are very much emerging today because of how this landscape is changing around protectionism, wanting to build up our own infrastructure and supply chain, our own defense systems locally. Some of that is going to be duplicative and perhaps drive less productivity in the future, but some of it will be genuinely helpful to drive productivity and therefore growth, particularly in a time where demographics are shifting and we can't necessarily rely on some of the labor force gains or immigration gains that we have in the past to drive growth.
Yeah. And that goes back to your point before, how the traditional 60-40 is being disrupted because of these structural shifts.
Correct. That is part and parcel. It's these vehicle and portfolio level changes that are really as a result of some of the bigger macro shifts and some of their implications. Greater yield curve steepening, higher inflation, potentially a lower growth environment, one where we're thinking more about productivity. You have to follow that chain and that line of thought into, okay, and then where are the industries that are going to actually capitalize on some of those trends that are shifting?
All right. Appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.